Welcome to Housing Health on Housing TV Africa, a show where we discuss health-related issues in the house or the housing system. My name is Confidence Ruben. Before we delve straight into the topic for discussion today, let's give you what the topic entails. Poor housing conditions have a significant impact on both physical and mental health. Issues such as dampness, mold, overcrowding, poor ventilation, and inadequate sanitation can contribute to a range of illnesses. Respiratory problems like asthma and bronchitis are common among individuals living in damp or mold-infested homes. Overcrowded spaces often lead to the rapid spread of infectious diseases, especially among children and the elderly. Inadequate heating and insulation can expose residents to extreme temperatures, increasing the risk of hypothermia or health-related illnesses. Mental health is also severely affected, as people living in unsafe and unstable housing are more likely to experience stress, anxiety, and depression. Children raised in poor housing conditions often showed delayed development and suffer from increased school absenteeism due to illness. And still for children, longer exposure to poorer housing conditions significantly impacts on children's social and emotional development. Now, for a 9-year-old who spent more of their childhood in homes that parents could not afford to keep warm, are considered too small, or in more disorderly neighborhoods, faces more social and emotional difficulties than those growing up in better quality housing. Today, we'll be discussing the health impact of poor housing. Before we delve straight into the topic, let's quickly go on a short break, and when we come back, our guest will be joining us in the studio to discuss the health impact of poor housing. Stay tuned.
Get credible and authentic housing news at your fingertips by downloading the Housing TV mobile app. You can also join the African International Housing Show live from across the globe through the Housing TV mobile app. The mobile app features live streaming and trending housing news. You can locate the AIHS venue via the app, network with AIHS seasoned speakers, and live chat with exhibitors. You can also order house or building materials at AIHS via this app. Download the Housing TV mobile app now from the App Store and Google Play Store. And don't forget to click on the notification button. Available for both iOS and Android users. Housing TV is also on Star Times, channel 149 decoder.
Welcome back, esteemed viewers. You are still watching Housing Health on Housing TV Africa on your favorite station, reaching you from the nation's capital, Abuja. And today we'll be discussing health impacts of poor housing with our guest who just joined us in the studio. She goes by the name Grace Ogilegbu. She is a mental health advocate and also a medical physiologist. Welcome, Grace.
Thank you so much.
It's good to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
How has your day been?
Very well.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So before we delve straight into the topic for discussion, let's talk about the recent insecurity issue in Benue State and also Plateau State. But I think Benue State is kind of more rampant. But then I had a discussion with someone, and the person was like, "This is not the first time Nigeria is experiencing this, insecurity issue. But while this one is kind of loud, is that it is kind of rampant in Benue State." But then, what is the federal government doing about it? If we could, have a comparison, if this situation arises in, outside Nigeria, you can agree with me that there is a swift response when it comes to insecurity. What do you have to say about this?
Okay, the current insecurity happening because even it's not just like what you said earlier. Yeah. We're not just having the problem of insecurity now. It has been there ever since.
Of course.
So if the government are very proactive towards this whole thing, I think it wouldn't have escalated the way it is right now. So okay. I can't really tell why our governments are not proactive, because I feel like that's why I would always say that the systematic failure of our country, as well as the regression we experience as a country, it's because of a particular mindset. I would say probably because it is not happening here.
Okay.
So it is not our business. I don't know if it's that true, but the whole diversity where this is my state, this is my state. So as long as it is not happening in my state, you feel like it is less concerned. And then I don't think there should be a need for all of this protocol. You know, I was actually listening to an interview, a certain honorable from Benue State. He was interviewed on a channel, and then he was like, it is because the government has not, that's the Benue government has not invited them over. And then I'm like, really? Do they have to invite you? If we believe that we are one nation, then if anything is happening here, it should affect everybody.
Of course.
So I feel like the reason why we see that this insecurity keep getting over and over, it's because we are not proactive.
Yeah.
The government are not. Because I think the reason why even the government are coming down, you know, are trying to do one or two, is because the people decide to protect, because they are hearing their voices.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
I really do not know why our government seems to be very, you know,
I mean, it's really heartbreaking. If the General Secretary of United Nations, Antonio Guterres, could, you know, like get himself involved in this current situation. I mean, as of yesterday, he was going to conduct a thorough investigation to know what exactly is the cause or the root of this insecurity. It is a social menace. So if he can be involved, why can't our security personnel give a swift response once they heard, you know, they got this information about the killings in Benue State and that of Plateau? As of, was it 2 days ago that the Benue State government decided to deploy more militias, more soldiers to these volatile prone areas? I mean, it's not normal at all. It's not okay. I feel the federal government should do more about, you know, securing lives and properties in the country.
That's the most important.
All right, let's move away from that and, you know, delve straight to the topic for discussion today, which is the health impact of poor housing. As a medical physiologist and a mental health advocate, let's hear your definition of what poor housing entails. What is poor housing?
Okay, so when you look at poor housing, okay, before I go deep into it, you know, when you reach out to me regarding the topic, you know, I'm so excited because it's one thing I've been advocating for, probably not on air, but then within my locality, because of its impact on our health, both our physical health and also our mental health. So when you look at poor housing condition, you realize that it is beyond having a crack wall or a leaking roof, but then a condition where it is unsafe, a condition where we don't have, you know, good drainage system, where there, just like we spoke about insecurity, where there is no security, where we don't have good ventilation, where we don't have, you know, safe water and clean environment. So this is what we classify as poor housing. So a place where it is just overcrowded, you know, where we have gutters which are not clean, and also this is what I would say, or this is what poor housing is. And then it has a very significant impact on our physical health, on our mental health. So when you look at, you know, when you look at the previous outbreaks of most diseases, right, things like cholera, you realize that it is linked to, you know, poor housing, because, you know, housing has to do with our environment. So if your environment is not healthy, you as a person is not healthy. So it is a public health issue because of its significant impact it can have on our.
So let me ask, you've mentioned unclean environments. What else did you say?
You know, lack of drainage system.
Exactly. Okay, infrastructural, there's lack of infrastructures in the environment. Is also part of, does it also contribute to poor housing?
It is.
Okay.
You know, when we don't have sound structures, it's also part of, you know, poor housing, because, you know, when you look at housing, it's about structure, you know, where people live, where people reside. So as long as you're not having a good structure, it can also be classified as poor housing.
All right, let's talk about the health issues related to poor housing conditions. What are these health issues related to poor housing conditions? Okay,
there's so many health issues. Right, you see, poor housing, it's more of a silent contributor to most of the health challenges we face in Nigeria, not just in Nigeria, globally. You know, there's a particular disease we call waterborne diseases, right? So, you know, there are houses, you know, when you speak about that in slum areas where we have overcrowded people, where we have lack of drainage system that help drain our sewage, like we have improper toilets. You discover that most of these things, like most of the sewages, most of this thing goes into either the gutter or then it goes on the street. And the thing about bacteria is, because waterborne disease is more like, pathogens that can be transmitted through water.
Okay.
So imagine, having water close by to a sewage that has not been treated, that has not been done anything, and then you can see it all around. Then you see water, and then this thing, once this bacteria get to infect or get to contaminate this water, it can cause sickness, things like waterborne disease. And an example of it, that's when we start having diarrhea. So you see someone coming constantly with diarrhea. This is one thing poor housing can do, because it's not even for when you go to places like within Abuja, places like Kabusa, you realize that there are no drainage system around that help take away people's sewages. And then you now have food being so close to. Imagine you're having a waste, and then you're having a place where they cook food. So you realize that once this food are contaminated, it can actually cause what. So we have things like what we call enteric fever. That's what we know as typhoid. So you get to hear people constantly coming down with typhoid. These are linked to contaminated and infected food. Because the moment the food gets into our system, it makes us ill. So you can see how that we keep having things like diarrhea. And diarrhea is a serious health challenge. The moment a child is dehydrated, or even an adult is dehydrated, you lose a lot of electrolyte and all. So this is one serious challenge poor housing can. And also we have what we call vector-borne diseases. So you get to see a lot of more. Okay, now we get to see that people keep asking, okay, why are we having more malarias now? It is related to the fact that we have aside the climate change, where we have rain pour down fan, or which can actually breed more of this mosquito. Then what about the stagnant water around? See, when this water are not flowing, when it rains and then there's no drainage to help flow this water down, and then it just form in a certain area. So these can actually breed things like mosquitoes, which of course once we get bitten by these mosquitoes, and then it leads to malaria and all. So you can see that aside water, aside having diarrhea, aside having infection, instead of having typhoid and all, we can also have constant malaria and all. And then aside another that we can also have respiratory issue, whereby imagine, I don't know if you've been in an overcrowded room, you know how tough it is, where there's no cross ventilation happening, no air is coming in and no air is going on, and then
inhale everything
and then you realize that probably there's someone who has maybe a respiratory tract infection, that's an infection or probably of the nose, that's the cold and the catarrh, the cough, and then the person expel secretion from their throat. That secretion is infected.
Of course it is.
So once it hangs in the atmosphere, and then people are there inhaling, and then we don't even know we get it. Because the thing about this is that once there's no air coming in, this air does not diffuse, it's still there.
Exactly.
So the moment we inhale it, we can also get infected with this. So that's why you get to see, once this person has catarrh, the next person is having it, the next person is having it. Why? Because these pathogens can be spread from one person.
It is contagious.
It is contagious from one person to another. So these are the common illness or diseases you can see within that are related to poor housing. And then you can see things like rashes. People coming down with diverse kinds of rashes, or people get infected with worms and all. These things actually comes with food, because our food can be infected. So it is contaminated as a food, but the moment it comes into our body, because these bacteria shouldn't be, so the moment it comes into our system, it can cause this disease. So these are the sickness, and that's why I keep talking about even down to my environment. Like, are you sure this water is clean? Are you sure this food has been cooked properly? Because I know that these things has been exposed. Because the people even cooking the food, how are we sure that their hands are properly clean? Because imagine someone touches this surface, someone that has maybe a bacterial infection, or maybe you just cough into your hand, and then you place it on this surface. The next person coming is going to be infected with that same bacterial infection. So this is how poor housing can actually cause most of this illness and diseases we just spoke about. And then it is just rampant, because when you go out there, it's just so pathetic that a number of Nigerians are living in areas where we have this poor housing, all of these slums and all.
The remote areas.
So these are the things where there are gutters around. The one that hurts me most is, most of the matters that comes from our toilet. There are places where it is not being treated. You just go to an area, you just say it's okay, we're running on the street, and they're like, people don't know how this thing can be dangerous. The moment you inhale this thing, it can be dangerous to your health. So poor housing can cause a lot of health issues.
I think I just learned something new now. Initially, I had this notion that typhoid is caused by drinking water that is not clean. I never knew that eating food that is unclean can also cause typhoid. And trust me, there are so many people having this notion, because when I ask some people, what's really the cause of typhoid? Because when you run a test, you find out that the typhoid is higher than the malaria. And then they'll tell you that you're not drinking clean water.
Also contaminated.
Talking about the clean water, we have pure water. Is the water really pure? We have bottled water. Is the water really pure? Is it clean? So talking about this clean water now, some of us, we know that pure water is not that pure and the bottled water is not that clean. What's your your advice when it comes to taking clean water? How do we keep our water clean? How do we take in clean water?
We can just like you said earlier regarding sachet water, we can account for them, and that's why we would always advise people to boil your water before drinking. Boil your water, because one thing about these pathogens, like bacteria, mostly bacteria, they can survive. They have a certain temperature in which they can survive. So boiling them, it might not really take everything, but then it's reduce the risks, the effects of that disease. So that's how we'd advocate: boil your water before drinking, regardless of what that water is. It is always good to boil the water and then before taking, because you cannot account for where this water are coming from. There are times where I go to the tap to fetch water, the water bottle, and then sometimes you think this water are clean because they should be clean.
They should be clean.
And then you realize that you just put in the cup, and then you realize there are particles inside the cup, because most of the times pipe gets to break somewhere, and you don't even know about it. So you see, that's why regardless of where the source of water is coming from, it is always advisable to boil the water before drinking. With that, we can reduce the impact of contaminated water.
Talking about the aspect of cooking now, there are just some people will tell you that once they don't need to wash this properly, they don't need to do this properly, that once they place the food inside the pot and it's on fire, the pressure, the heat, it kills every germs and whatever that is on that vegetable or food. And you agree with me that that's a wrong notion, right? That's a wrong thought. All right, viewers, just as what our guest has just said now, if you are the kind of person having this notion that you don't need to wash your vegetables or anything you're about to place on the fire very well, because you already have the thought that once you place it on the fire, the heat is going to kill every germs or pathogens. It's wrong. It is very, very wrong. So wash whatever you want to cook, wash it very well. If it's possible, you can even add salt, when you're washing your vegetables, you wash it so that it can kill the germs, then you start cooking. There is no shortcut when it comes to living healthy, no matter where you are staying, whether it's in the city or the rural part of the country. All right, so you've given us a breakdown on the physical impact, on poor housing when it comes to our health. So how does poor housing impact our mental health as a mental advocate?
Since we spoke earlier on the impact on our physical, so it can also affect our mental health in so many ways. Just look at the insecurity, because we defined poor housing, as a condition where we don't have security, where we have insecurity and all. So imagine, let us look at what is happening currently in Benue State. Imagine the people living there having to know that we are vulnerable, right? We are having series of attacks. Because one of the mental issues that can result from poor housing, especially in the case of insecurity, anxiety, right? Anxiety become traumatized because you know that these people are coming, so you've developed a kind of immune. So there's this intense fear, there's this uncontrolled. Your heart rate is high, your blood pressure is high, and all of this. And why? Because you know that there was a previous attack, and so they're going to be a new attack. So you can see that poor housing, in the case of insecurity, can cause anxiety, can even cause insomnia, that sleep disorder, because you don't get to sleep properly.
That's true.
And if you don't sleep properly, you can't be better, right? So you can see that poor housing can actually, significantly impact our mental. And then we have things like depression. Imagine the insecurity happening. A lot of people are depressed.
Of course.
People living in that. Maybe we might not really feel that depressed,
because we are not there.
We are not there. But people living within that, circuit are depressed because of because they don't even know what their fate is tomorrow. Because imagine, because I feel like the village that the current village that we heard about the insecurity issue, I feel like maybe they were even thinking, oh, they're not going to come close to where we are. So you realize that people would now be more depressed, or probably living in a crowded environment, or in a room that is that is just crowded with people. You don't have your space, you can't do anything. That alone can cause depression. That it can even lead to even suicide and all. So, things like anxiety, things like depression, things like PSTD. So all of these things, poor housing can actually live, or probably living in a structure that that this structure is not sound. You just know that, oh, the next thing that is going to happen, this roof is going to come down.
That's true.
Or the next thing is going to happen is that the wall is going to crack. So all of this fear, all of these things can cause mental health issue. And the thing is that once we're not mentally stable, we can't be productive as human beings. We can't function because we need our mental state to be stable, to be productive.
And when you don't function properly as an individual, every other factors or every other aspect in the society will be affected. So our mental health needs to be on check. All right, you've already shed light on overcrowding. So what medical care should one seek due to conditions, causes, or that has worsened your health due to poor housing? What medical care should one seek?
Okay, those in the vulnerable place that's already coming down with diseases, like things like diarrhea, things like enteric fever, respiratory tract infection, that's common cold and all. So one of the things we want advice to seek, you can go to the hospital. Most of this, there are treatment options for it. It's not like it's death sentence, in as much as we would want to eradicate the whole thing, but in as much as we're waiting for the time where we can develop as a country. So if by any means you're down with one of this disease or one of this sickness, it is just good to visit the healthcare, because there are treatment option for this thing. There are drugs you can take that can make you feel better. So, and then there are vaccine available, like your vaccine for typhoid, and also if you live in an environment where you are constantly exposed, or an environment where you're constantly exposed to most of this waterborne disease and all, you can actually go for vaccine. So you can get vaccinated. So those are the two things we could do. That's people in vulnerable area. Go for medical checkup, go for treatment option, and also get vaccinated.
So what about therapy? Is it also part of the...
in terms of mental health issue, of course that people you could, especially when it has to do with anxiety, you can actually meet up with professionals like therapists who can help you. One of the problem about this this therapy is just that I would always be sincere. I always tell people, once the root cause has not been treated, the people will always go back to it. So imagine you being depressed because of insecurity, or you having anxiety because of insecurity, and then the insecurity is not being treated, and then even if there is a therapy helping you out, what about when you go back? Of course you can actually seek therapy from professionals who can help you become better, and also help you to know how to navigate your path.
That's true.
Even because aside that making you feel better, you also need to be empowered. So even if you still live within that community, how to respond and act to those situations.
So how can we positively impact our health and well-being? How can we positively impact our health and well-being?
So we can. So since our conversation has to do with poor housing, and then I said something earlier. Since we're waiting for a country to be developed, we're waiting for a country to become better. So while we wait for that, there are practices we need to put in place, to sustain, good health, good mental health. And one of the things is having to clean our environment. In as much as, these things are there, or at least we can reduce its rate, we can reduce the whole infection these pathogens can cause by having to clean our environment. There's always a need. We can just do community cleanup. So we don't need, because the thing is that one person will not want to, go clean. So we can have what we call community cleanup. So in that way, it can help our health. And also, I would also want to talk about washing of hands, because, we spoke earlier how that people do not, get to wash their hands. So
after the COVID-19 era,
everything stop. Because one thing about most of these pathogens, these bacteria, this fungi and all, is that the moment a person who is infected touches the surfaces, the next person touching is likely going to be infected.
It's kind of contagious. Okay.
Yeah, so get to wash it properly, because you don't even know who has touched this stuff. Because now as I'm touching this, I don't know who has touched this surface. So for every time you want to touch your face, get to wash. And that's how I would also advise, don't stop touching your face. We should stop touching our face, because you don't even know what you've touched. So washing our hand regularly can also help, can help our health. And also cooking our food very well, in as much as we discussed earlier how that it is in as much as we know that cooking food can help kill certain bacteria. That does not mean we shouldn't cook. We shouldn't wash the food. So, but then wash your food and cook your food very well. Properly. Your meat, whatever you are eating, we should cook it very well. We should wash it properly, and then avoid staying in overcrowded place. Okay. Because most times when you look at overcrowded places, they are not cross ventilation. Okay. So we should avoid staying in places that are overcrowded, because once a person expels secretion from their throat and their nose and they're infected, we can also get infected. Okay. So avoid, overcrowded places. And then if they're in need, we can always have to get, constant supply of light, where, we get to have our fans and AC working. So even in a contaminated, atmosphere, we can help diffuse, most of this oxygen, they are already contaminated. So all of these practices can help us, maintain good health, maintain good well-being, even in the midst of all of this.
Okay, thank you so much, Grace Ogilego. It was nice having you on the show.
Thank you.
I think I will admit I've learned one or two. I mean, the aspect of typhoid not only caused by drinking water that is unclean. Eating unclean food can also cause typhoid and all that. Thank you so much. Hope to see you some other time on the show.
Thank you.
All right, viewers, this is where we draw the curtain on housing health on your favorite station, Housing TV Africa. I hope you've learned one or two concerning the health impact of poor housing. It doesn't only affect our physical health, it also affects our mental health. So wherever you are, make sure your environment is clean and safe. Till I see you some other time, I am Confidence Ruben. Keep watching Housing TV Africa.